Just before we get started, there's a number of individuals and organizations we want to thank. First of all, our amazing panel, which consists of Richard Iandoli from Iandoli and Decide, along with Sarah Fleming from Ross Silverman, as well as Tom Plummer from Immigration Equality. So thank you to all of them and to those organizations and law firms who are doing this panel with us. We have a number of co-sponsors as well to thank as well, including Northeastern Queer Caucus, the Network La Red, Mass Equality, Family Equality Council, Hispanic Black Gay Coalition, Queer Asian and Pacific Islanders Association, and then Map for Health. A number of these organizations actually have tables outside, so please do visit them, and they have information, brochures, and whatnot, as does GLAAD as well too. Again, we're so excited to have you guys at this event. I feel like we've had this panel so many times where we had to give bad news to folks or to ask people to be patient if they could be patient. So it's so wonderful to actually have this panel finally for the first time with good news to share with everyone. And so hopefully we'll be able to answer all your questions. GLAAD is Gay and Lesbian Advocates and Defenders. We're a legal organization based here in Boston, and we do litigation, legislation, as well as public education around LGBT rights, as well as people living with HIV. We are here for you, and so if you have any questions regarding your legal rights, or if you're facing any instances of discrimination, or if you have an immigration question after this forum, please do contact us. We have an info line from Monday to Friday, 1:30 to 4:30, with wonderful volunteers who will be happy to provide legal information as well as answer your questions. So GLAAD has also been on the front lines of this fight against DOMA, and we're so excited about the Windsor decision on June 26th, which finally ended the horrible discrimination that DOMA imposed on same-sex couples and their families, and particularly how they've harmed so many binational couples in this country. And so before we started with the actual substance of the program, I thought that maybe we could talk just a little bit and celebrate just a little bit what a wonderful victory we had at the Supreme Court just a few weeks ago. As many of you know, the Windsor case was a case where the ACLU represented Edie Windsor, who was a woman who had been in a relationship with Thea Spire for decades. Towards the end of Thea's life, they went to Canada to marry. Tragically, Thea died just a couple years later. And because the Defense of Marriage Act forbade the federal government from recognizing their marriage, Edie was forced to pay over $300,000 in estate taxes from the property that she inherited from Thea. And so she brought a lawsuit against the US government. That lawsuit was one of many lawsuits, including two lawsuits that GLAAD had brought originally in 2009 and 2010, the Gill lawsuit and the Peterson lawsuit, which many of you have heard about as well too. GLAAD was also there to work with the Windsor team as well to coordinate the amicus brief strategy at the Supreme Court. And we couldn't have been more happy with the results of that decision. I want to actually just give a shout out to Justice Kennedy for a wonderful, beautiful decision. Just to give a sense, I mean, the move from where we were to where we are right now has been so dramatic. I mean, if you think about it, this is the Supreme Court, which historically laughed in our faces when we asserted our rights not to be fired for being gay, as was the case in the Kameny case in the 50s. It laughed in our faces when we sought the right to marry for the very first time in the Baker case in the 70s. And it laughed in our faces again when we said that no state should be able to make our relationships criminal in the Bowers v. Hardwick case in the 80s. And so for us to go from that moment where the Supreme Court didn't even recognize us as citizens with the same rights as everyone else in this country to this decision just a few weeks ago, I think is extraordinary. If I can just read just a couple of quotes from the decision, which I think are just really exemplify how Justice Kennedy got it. And I think there's no better way to just put it than that he got it. He got the fact that gay and lesbian individuals are equally deserving of the dignity that all Americans and non-Americans deserve as well too, and also how our families are also equally deserving of those protections as well too. So one quote where he talks about DOMA's harms, he says, quote, "DOMA demeans the couple and humiliates tens of thousands of children now being raised by same-sex couples. The law in question makes it even more difficult for the children to understand the integrity and closeness of their own family and is concord with other families in their community and in their daily lives." So we think about how long we've been on the defensive to defend our families and our own children and the ability of same-sex parents to be just as good parents as any other parents, to this argument that Kennedy makes, where he basically flips that on its head. And he said, you know, actually, why are we talking about how same-sex children and same-sex couples might be harmed when it's actually the government that's actually harming those families and those children? I think that's just an extraordinary turn that he did in this opinion. But the part of the opinion, which actually was the one part that made me choke up just a little bit while I was reading it on June 26th, was the moment in the opinion where he's talking about Edie and Thea and their love for each other and their relationship with each other. Because it's really the first time, I think, that the US Supreme Court has recognized that all same-sex couples have the same desires, which is to be able to live their lives with somebody that they love and they want to commit their lives to, and have those relationships recognized and protected. What he writes is, quote, "When at first Windsor and Spire longed to marry, neither New York nor any other state granted them that right. After waiting some years, in 2007, they traveled to Ontario to be married there. It seems fair to conclude that until recent years, many citizens had not even considered the possibility that two persons of the same sex might aspire to occupy the same status and dignity as that of a man and woman in lawful marriage. That belief, for many who have long held it, became even more urgent, more cherished when challenged, but for others came the beginnings of a new perspective, a new insight." And I think this decision and this panel is a wonderful way to usher in that new perspective and that new insight. And so we're actually going to start with Richard Iandoli, who's been a long-time friend of GLAAD's and the person we call when we don't know the answer to an immigration question. Richard has practiced U.S. immigration law for 35 years. He's a member of Iandoli & Desai, PC, a 5-attorney immigration law firm in Boston. He was the chair of the New England chapter and a member of the National Board of Governors of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. He has been a cooperating attorney with GLAAD for 20 years, and he is also a member of the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association. And he is going to be talking probably what most of you are here to, the most important things you want to hear about, which is what are the nuts and bolts of actually applying for family-based visas. And so we're going to start with Richard, and then as we get to each panelist, I'll introduce them in turn as well too. So, go ahead.